yourself and about your campaign.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David Robinson, and thank you, Muleskinners, for having me. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So my name is Tonya Heath, and I was born and raised in Columbia. I went Fairview, Hickman, West. Then, since my dad was a MU geology professor, and my mom was a Spanish teacher at Oakland Junior, as back in the day they were junior highs, and then at Hickman High School, I decided to go to Southwest Texas State University for 2 years. And everyone there was like, if you're interested in advertising, why aren't you going to the best journalism school in the world, the University of Missouri Journalism School? And so I said, yes, I am returning home and going to Mizzou. And so I finished up at Mizzou and got my degree in journalism with an emphasis at the time in advertising, which now is called strategic communication. And from there, I was the director of advertising for Mizzou Magazine for 6 years. And then I worked in the marketing department for Extension for 2 years. My husband and I had gotten married and we had a newborn. And so then I stayed at home for a bit. And that's when I started my wellness business. And that has been ongoing for probably over 20 years. And the wellness business consists of sound therapy. I have a biomat. I also do aura cleansings. And so it's just very health focused. And then career wise, I also started teaching in the journalism school back in 2012. And I taught for 12 years in the strategic communication department. And I taught a variety of classes, everything from advertising labs to public relations classes to event classes, as well as I created a class on how to actually get a job when you're in the room in the interview. So a lot of times students, of course, they've been sitting, absorbing all this great knowledge for all these years, but they have not practiced the techniques in order to take that knowledge and explain it to someone competitively when interviewing for a job. And I just thought that that was very helpful to do. So I finished that in December of 23. And then I have been doing my wellness business as well as talking to a couple of friends of mine. And we've been starting a consulting business that would take their nonprofit knowledge as well as my in the classroom knowledge to help students K through 12 as far as not only just, finding their path in life, path rather than career path, but just the holistic approach of not only studying, but why studies can lead to their passion and how that holistically feeds into a wonderful life. So that's me in a nutshell. Personally, our daughter is 23. She was a superstar soccer player at Hickman and then competed at Columbia College for a couple of years and is an artist. And so she is currently out of state doing some art and things like that. And my husband's retired. He worked for 30 years for Columbia Public Schools as a business teacher as well as the practical arts coordinator. So that's my personal history. But the reason that I am running for mayor is because I am very concerned about where we are in our city. And I just feel like I have a different approach that I would like to step forward with as the mayor and take our city in a direction that I believe would help us achieve those goals just in a more focused way. And so what my platform is that I am focused on crime reduction. I am focused on economic opportunity, and I am also focused on transparency. And with that, there are other issues completely feeding into those issues. One would be the displaced or the unhoused or the homeless people. Another would be infrastructure of the city, because all of that plays into how everything works or is delayed. And we really need to start making some major progress with that. With crime reduction, I believe that I believe that I will be focused on helping the police officers with their retirement funding, because they have said repeatedly that the reason that we're not attracting and retaining officers is because their retirement funding, even though it was changed in around 2012, the repercussions of that change have not worked out. And so we are not retaining officers. We're not having people try out like we used to. There's a lot of social factors that go into that as well. And there's a lot of interest from young people as far as what they want to do with their lives. And so, but with that, we still need officers. We need officers at full capacity. And as a growing city, we're going to need to have the officers well trained in all kinds of ways to handle situations, but also to create those relationships with the communities and understand not only from how they perceive going into a community, but role playing to see how various communities are going to perceive them coming in, and through that role playing and live training rather than any sort of online training that I know across the country, lots and lots of different industries had to do just because of COVID. And we all had to do that. But I think in retrospect, there's things that we can learn online, but there's also things that we need to learn in person. So there's the support for the police. Then there's also, with the crime reduction, I have been talking to people who have been in prison and have interviewed them about what it was that caused that shift and as to why they ended up committing the crimes that they did. And there's definite reasons. There's poverty, there's a lack of resources, there's mental health, there's a lack of a good role model. There's other factors that play into it. And when you look at all those situations, there are certainly things that as a society, as a community, we can address. We can address it through the school systems. We can address it through the nonprofits. We can address it through volunteers, and we can address it in a community. We can have regular meetings to find out how we can help one another. And I think that's very important because, again, I think with the fact that our city is growing, I think that it's easy to think, well, someone else is going to handle this. But what has happened is that people have gotten so busy with their own lives. The generations are changing. The personalities of the generations are showing through as far as the sacrificial nature of previous generations that had touched upon World War II and the mentality of those generations, and then some of the middle and younger generations in a different thought process. And so I think we're the pros and the cons of any thought process. There's a pro to it that if it's done too much, it can be exhausting. But the con of it is that when it's not done, then there's a gap. And we notice that. So I'm also reaching out to different generations and just talking through all those types of things. The other part of it is that there's mental health associated with the challenges with crime. There's impulse thinking. And with impulse thinking, that is also accelerating based on the fact that so many smartphones are out there and so many smartphones are being used by younger and younger people who their brain, as we know, is not being developed. I mean, anyone's brain at any time really does not fully develop, science will tell you, until 25 years old. And so if somebody starts a smartphone in high school, that has a different, you know, outcome than if a toddler is given a smartphone. And how does that work throughout their life as far as impulse control, thought process, things like that? And it's not that we're going to change people, but we definitely need to educate, and we have to have intentional and purposeful ways that we are working to create opportunities so that people can have that extended thought process. So another thing with the crime reduction is I've talked to a company called Convict Solutions X, and their company is focused on helping people that have been to prison get a job, establish a work history, and become successful. So that is a huge thing, because a lot of times people do not want to hire people who've been to prison, but that just perpetuates other problems. So this is a company I'm working with. You said 20 minutes. So I'm like, do I have 5 minutes or do I have 7 minutes? Because I want to make sure.
You can take longer than 20 if you need.
Okay.
Just saying there will be a lot of questions.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so economic opportunity. Economic opportunity. I would like to have a broader discussion with people about how that we all have a part to play in what I would like to call the Columbia Standard. And so the Columbia Standard is that I want to have great sidewalks for all neighborhoods. I want to have great lighting for all neighborhoods. It is important for safety. It is important for quality of life. It is important for how people think about their neighborhood and how they take care of it. I'd like to talk about how that I'd like to brainstorm and work with different organizations that are already putting on like the James and Annelle Witt. They are already putting on these career and job fairs and business opportunity fairs. And so people can come and learn about businesses they may not know about. And I want to bring attention to how if we take all of us, if we take our social, um, let's see, it's social, but it's also habitual. It's like all of us have our place where we're like, oh, okay, if I'm going to go get a burger, this is where I go. And if I'm going to go grocery shopping, this is where I'm going to go. And if I'm going to do this, this is where I go. And we always just do this because it's convenient and we're humans. However, I'm going to start encouraging people like, hey, let's start looking at making that extra effort. And once a month, go across town, once a week, whatever you can do, go across town, make that effort to patronize a business that you may not know about. But let's work on building those relationships, those opportunities, taking action, and getting the result, not only for our favorites, but for the ones that community-wide would help with with business growth from the north side to the south side, from the west side to the east side. Let's expand how we think about how we can help each other, because sometimes it can be quite simple and delightful. For example, there's a Mexican restaurant I totally enjoy that's on the north side of town. Now that might be a stretch for me as far as convenience, but if I'm patronizing it once a month, I may just enjoy it so much that I want to start patronizing it twice a month. And that might be a huge, economic flow. And so I just want to bring that top awareness to people. I also want to work with nonprofits and faith organizations and volunteers to help people with resume building and connections, because I believe that a lot of times people hear about jobs or they get they get the reference that they need because people know people. But it's difficult if you don't know the people that know the people that know the people, you know? And so, like, let's create more of these opportunities where we are meeting each other and creating an opportunity where we can refer someone that's not in our easy social circle, that will really start to transform our city as far as opportunity and growth and build trust. So that's kind of my economic opportunity. And then transparency, I think there's a lot of confusion and question, and there's a lot of frustration. And I think that, you know, as far as city government is concerned in general, that I think I went through the Civic Academy in the fall, and all the employees that spoke to us and explained how various parts of the city work, they were outstanding employees, and everyone was amazingly impressed with each of them. And so I think that there's communication issues, or there's behind the scenes thinking as to why they do something this way, but they, you know, nobody knows and stuff like that. And so I think just overall better communication will help with the transparency. And if people have questions, I think it would help if we had some sort of way that, because I know that people are busy, they're working, they may have questions, but everybody's got that go-to person that if I have a question, I'm like, that so and so knows the answer. So if we can have in the transparency to get the framework of why certain things are decided the way they are and what concerns need to get to the top. If we can have more of those discussions with the people that maybe they can't be there, but they've got their go-to person who can. So let's just have more meetings so that people can understand things in a way that keeps people engaged. Because I think what shows up with voting and everything else, committees, all that sort of stuff, where they're always asking, please, people sign up for committees for the city. It's because people want to know that their time is valued. They want to know that if they do the work, that people are actually listening, and it's not some sort of 90s business model, which we all went through, where the bosses were like, hey, why don't you tell us how to do this? And you spend all this time and you get all this hope is to do whatever. You do the presentation to the boss, and then the boss time and time and time again would always do what you knew the boss was going to do to begin with. And so that was just very disheartening. And so I think that becomes disengagement. And so I think that people want to be engaged, and the more that we can engage them and explain things, I think that will help, either that they will understand and maybe they can come up with some solutions that will help, or that will make sense and then they don't feel disregarded. So, okay. And then I can talk about the homeless and I can talk about infrastructure later, or whatever you'd like during questions.
Well, do people have questions?
I do, Tanya.
Yes.
I am aware that there are problems with pensions, not for the police, but for the other part. And so what is it? Why can't they get pensions, and what needs to be done about that? The police.
Yeah. So from what I understand, the police and fire back in 2012, the city at that time had decided that they didn't, the way that things were set up it was not actually going to work out for going forward. And so they renegotiated what they were doing, and then everybody agreed to that. But I believe that after that, the fallout is that it's not working the way that the police thought, that the firefighters thought, that all of, everybody thought. And so right now, the firefighters are also not happy. And so they want both the police and the firefighters, who they have their physical job that is very demanding. And so they're not like other employees that may work 30 or 35 years, because the physicalness that the job demands usually wears out their body between, 50 and 60, as far as like really being able to do the job. And so they are looking for a better retirement system that is funded at a higher level. Because right now it's funded, I believe, at more of the 50% level. And so I believe that they're very concerned that when they retire, they are not going to have the money to then be retired. And I think
So-
that's part of their fear.
So this needs to be a change in city statute? How do you go about changing it? And I'm
Yeah.
assuming that the union is working with the city on this.
Yes, they are in regular contact about that. And so, and the city has a different perspective. The city has the perspective of like if your house, if you bought your house for, let's say, $300,000, you would put a down payment down, and then you would have your monthly mortgage. And so the city has a different perspective about how to go about doing this. And they are comfortable with their thought about how this is going to play out. And I believe that the unions of the police and the firefighters are not as confident and not as comfortable with the percentage that it's currently at. And I think if the percentage was at a higher level, then the confidence that it would be there by the time they retired would help tremendously. And so, yes, so I definitely want to talk to both groups. I want to find out exactly. I mean, I have talked to both groups. I want both groups to be in the room so that we're talking and brainstorming about, okay, exactly where could each group meet, where they would meet for their thoughts that they agree on. Here's the differences. How far away are the differences? What are things that people are willing to try? What are things that they believe wouldn't be of any benefit? And how can we move this forward? Because at the end of the day, unfortunately, we've got on the police and firefighter thing, even if their retirements, let's pretend their retirements were funded at the levels that they wanted. Regardless of that, you have so many young people coming up who pick any profession. They're not looking at it in the same way that previous generations have looked at it, like a calling. They're looking at it like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I get my paycheck. I have this for retirement and that type of thing. And that's a different mentality as far as when young people are coming up and how they are considering which career to go into. And then you also have the difference between what people knew in the 80s and 90s as far as health risks and what people know now. And so both professions have different health risks that back in the 90s, it wasn't talked about. There wasn't a plan. I went to the First Responders Gala last night, and there was a wonderful video explaining how the EMS, the fire, and the police and first responders, how the secondary trauma of going on these calls and helping, how that affects their mental health, how, they're going to see trauma counselors, and how that affects their interaction and their health, their heart rate, and all sorts of things that was not discussed at all 20 years ago. So young people and their families are looking into all these things. And if you look at that versus being a banker, or you look at that versus being a lawn care owner, business owner, you know, there's challenges just in the profession.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Kathy?
Yes. My question is, how do you visualize the role of the mayor, how you would want to handle it in our council city manager form of government?
So I would work with DeCarlin, and I would, as a new mayor, I would work with him. And at the very beginning, I would ask him, okay, what things, since he's become the city manager, what things are difficult for city staff? What things are going smoothly? What parts of city government does he feel needs to have a better approach towards explaining things to the public? I would find out what things, you know, where things are bottlenecked, why they're bottlenecked from the staff point of view. And then I would brainstorm with him on various ways that we can achieve the mutual goal of making our city move forward robustly and efficiently.
Thank you.
Excuse me for disappearing from time to time. I think my internet is a bit iffy today. So I'll try to get in a question while others are
Okay.
thinking. And it is to ask you of your thoughts on infrastructure of our city. You've mentioned already the sidewalks and lighting, which is an interesting and certainly um, laudable idea, especially in some areas. But generally, I'd have to say that I've been impressed with the kind of infrastructure and its use that we have in our city. So where do you think there have been missed opportunities or things that are definitely going to be needed in the future?
Yes. So one of the things that we definitely need to do is we definitely need to find we need to take the time to get organized with the situation with the bonds that have already been passed. And we know that the electric bond was passed in 2015 and the water bond was passed in 2018. And so those are high priorities. And especially when you look, unfortunately, at California, you look at, you know, just the infrastructure problems, you know, all across the United States that have been aging, and you realize that you absolutely cannot put this off, especially when it's been, you know, it's 10 years since that bond has been passed. And so what I want to do is recommend that we have a commission a working group that's commissioned, that is consisting of retired executives of the Water and Light and the former Water and Light Advisory Board members, 2 representatives from the current Water and Light Advisory Board representative, as well as the Financial and Audit Committee, as well as the current manager and staff from the Water and Light Department, to examine the unintended consequences of prior decision-making by the city council, and to create a specific plan with a timeline that will have the recommendations to get the voter-approved bond issues moving forward. this will not only provide the best discussions and outcome for moving us forward, but it will also be transparent and it will work towards building trust in the community. And so that's the thing. I mean, as mayor, we have got to give the updates to the community with what we're going to do, because there's so much disconnect that people feel in limbo. And when they feel in limbo, they get despondent or they get angry. And neither one is what we want for our citizens. And we don't want residents to feel as though we are not following through with what we've said. And so, so that is something I would be addressing right off the bat.
Scott,
David, are
you
you
have your
frozen?
hand up.
Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Tanya, glad
Scott.
that you were able to stop by, that you're here.
There he
So I'm
is.
sitting
Thank
just in the
you.
background, so not to take up bandwidth or anything. Um, what I'm curious about is what ways are you going to try and get people involved in the community, especially those who want to? I just hung up a little while ago with an African American woman who was discussing at length about a problem with the naming of the courts during the renovation of Douglas Park. A lot of people were not informed of the naming choices and things, and they also were told that word had been put out, but it did not reach any of the people because it did not go to any sources that they utilized to find information about the city. So I'm
Mhm.
sure this is applied to other people. It's also a generational thing. Just putting it on Facebook or whatever does not work. And I'll
Yes.
disappear back into the background. And
Okay, so Scott, let me just double check that your question is, how would I improve communication to the public?
also
Okay,
how to
yes.
and also how to get them involved
How to get
in
them
different
involved.
activities.
Okay. Okay. So yes, yes on that. And I know, because it's like when I was on the board for the West Broadway Swim Club pool, it was hilarious because in the old days, if it was raining or it might rain or whatever, you'd endlessly call the pool to find out if the pool was going to be open. And, you know, if you got a ring, 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 and no one answered, the pool was closed, or you had lifeguards that were saying it's open or it's closed for 20 minutes because of lightning or, you know, whatever, 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, when I was on the board, we were like, oh, let's post it on Facebook. And so people would come up and they were like, well, I'm not on Facebook. I'm on whatever. And then so we'd add that. And we are like, this will solve it, because now we've got the phone, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram. I think that was the third one. And then someone else would come up and they were like, I'm not on any of those and I'm on this. So we'd add that. And all the time we kept doing it. Everybody, like, we ended up with 10 different ways to communicate that the pool was going to close. And then, like you said, generationally, then we had one lady come up and she was like, I'm not on any of that. And so she wanted to be told in person. So what I found out is that the answer is not which one more can we add, and that's the secret sauce. The answer is you add it onto everything. You tell people in person, you have signs. Oh yeah, okay, because we had a sign. So like if you came in person, you were supposed to read the sign. She didn't read the sign. So then you had to specifically train the lifeguards to say, hey, oh, and this happened for swim meets. That was the big one. They'd always forget that on Wednesdays at 3:00 we had to close the pool for swim meets. And so, like, yes, I totally understand that, as far as people getting frustrated with communication and it being a generation gap. And I believe it's also I want the convenience of you communicating to me in the form that I like to receive communication. And so that's really the bottom line, as it turns out, which is, it'll make you crazy. So, but as mayor, I have already experienced that people are not going to change. And so we have to change to adapt to what works for them. And so I would put it out on all the methods. I would also generationally find out where people get their messages. I'd also talk to the leaders of the community, and I'd have probably an email that went out to the leaders. Granted, I did 2 summits. The first was an at-risk youth summit. The second was a mental health summit. And I put out something just in December. And someone was like, I put it out twice in December and once in January. And the person was like, I never heard anything about it. And I was like, I sent them the screenshots that I had done that. And they, I was like, so we're going to try repetitively. We're going to try multiple ways and hope that the many attempts will result in at least one communication style reaching that person in a way that they can hear it and remember it. So that's how I would work on that. And then the second one is how to get people engaged. And I believe with that one, people, again, they have to believe that their time, which has always been valuable, but certainly is at a premium now. I believe that they have to see that their time and their effort is being appreciated, respected, and used. And I think the reason, like, when you hear people are going to volunteer to pick up trash and things like that, I think they have a sense of accomplishment when they're finished because they can see that the trash has been picked up on this street, and they know they've made a difference. And I think, so having measurable goals as far as here's what we'd like the community to do, people at large in Columbia, and here's why. Here's our goal for this time, and here's our goal for the year. Because if we can chunk it out so that we're not trying to take a bite of the entire apple, but just like one bite, then I think people can have a sense of accomplishment. They can become friends. I think having friend groups, is very important because then you're going to see that person. You have that accountability with the person again, and I think that helps.
Tanya, this is Boone County Muleskinners. So I would think we would be remiss not to ask you to give us your ideas on city-county cooperation, perhaps areas of weakness or hopes for better distribution of resources and opportunities between the city and Boone County.
Okay, thank you. So I think the one that's gotten the most press lately has been where Sheriff Dwayne Carey is putting together his training center for new recruits to be sheriffs, and other people can come and learn and train there and go elsewhere. And I understand, our police chief, Jill Schluty, they have a different model where they're going to be, working out of Jeff City. And I've understood that there's certain training modules that they want to do that's specific to Columbia. And so I think right now, I mean, it's one of those things that ideally, it seems like it would be great if everything was just within our backyard. And yet, I know philosophically, that if everybody who grew up here went to the University of Missouri, it's logical. It's theoretically less expensive. You could live with your parents and go to college, right? Or Columbia College or Stevens College, like in theory. But like, how many of us go away and all this sort of stuff for different training and things like that? So So I understand right now, the tension from what I've read, from what I've heard on the radio, I understand it. I don't know if that's going to be the way that it is always. And so I would just like to have a conversation with each of those individuals and just sort of, see what their long-term hopes and thoughts are as far as long-term. And then as far as the rest of it, I definitely think that we need to keep in mind as the city, uh, the population increases, how we're going to talk about what's going to happen as the city expands. Everyone knows land is limited. Everyone knows that when you put the piping out and then, the annexation comes later, that is part of the conversation, but I'd also like us to have a vision about things, because from what I understand, Ashland has made some interesting infrastructure developments near the airport that, in retrospect, 20 or 30 years ago, maybe we should have had a vision committee as far as like what we think and what we want and how all that plays together as far as the long-term health of our city.
I'd like you to go ahead and talk about the problems of the homeless.
Yes. So, okay. So that one, I have talked to a doctor, I've talked to a nurse, I've talked to business owners that have been affected by the warming fires. I have talked to hospital administrators as far as just the overall situation. I've talked to EMS people. I went to 6 different homeless camps before our first snowstorm, or our big snowstorm. Maybe I should say big snowstorm. And then again, I went and I talked to one of a displaced or homeless individual, and am continuing to. And so for sure, there are a lot of interesting things I have found out, and I am in the thinking process of gathering information and thinking about it. And the way that I go about things, since I was a strategic communication instructor for 12 years and have a 30-year advertising and public relations, is that I like to do the research. I like to define the situation. I like to define the boundary of how we're going to, have the boundary of the issue. And then I also like to define successful outcomes. And as I go through this process, I'm also aware that there's new information that can come at any time that can either support the direction that, after talking to all these people and continuing to talk to people, it can support that direction, or it can possibly change the direction. Probably not drastically, but potentially. And so I'm always refining what is going on, what new information there is, and working with a wide variety of people so that we can have that checks and balances as far as our thoughts. Because if you just talk to one type of thought person, you're only going to get one part of the solution, in my opinion. And the two balances that we're having to work on, which is why I think we're creatively stuck in this whole situation, not only in Columbia, but in this whole United States, is that everybody either has a big heart or they perceive they have a big heart. And that is like, okay. But then we have limited resources. Every city, every state, the whole country has limited resources. And then you're dealing with the human factor. you know, so it's this thing that everybody is struggling with. And by not having those honest conversations, it makes it difficult because there's a lot of shame that I think holds us back from really talking about what it is, because the shame is, if I just loved them more, if I could just care for them more, that will solve it. But is that is in a way what keeps us from solving it. Because if you're judging the outcome based on our emotions versus what the people that are struggling actually need, we're not thinking logically enough about how to go about solving the issue that surrounds homelessness. And so obviously, so there's sort of like 4 categories. And so obviously, the person that is just temporarily, weird things happen, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That group, they would be logically the easiest to help, right? Because maybe we just need to connect them with the right resource. Maybe we just need to tell them about a job opportunity. It may not be their career choice, but if it puts food on the table, that might be a win-win for the temporary situation to get them out of that downward spiral, to get them bumped back up. Okay. Then you have the addicted. Then you also have the mentally ill. And then you also have the social aspect, which nobody really seems to think about, of the community. And so, for instance, in any team, in any job, you're looking for, do I fit in here? Can I succeed here? And so if you are addicted, then you have a social group of other people who are going to accept you. And you may be doing the things that are not healthy for you, but you're not getting piled on with the shame and the frustration and the denial and the this and that and all this sort of stuff. And then if you have a mental health condition where people are just up and down, there's all kinds of things that happen, dynamics within their brain that they maybe cannot control their emotions or their impulses the way that other people can, then that is another thing that they know, that their social group that accepts them is important to them. And so I am working with people that we're looking at just different things that we can do, because it kind of comes down to 2 tracks. It comes down to the detoxification, and they're showing more and more that heavy metals, parasites, plastics. They just said like last week that, they think there's a teaspoon of plastics in people's brain from all the plastics that are in everything. And how does that mess with our thought processes, our emotions, our ability to sleep? I mean, there's so many things that those things just screw around with us, and we don't even know that that's what's causing these wide range variabilities with behavior. So, detox on that. And then there's the nutritional and positive aspects, for lack of a better term, is the regular nutrition that somebody would benefit from, of fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, good sleep, all kinds of things on the positive here. And then there is the whole community aspect of the whole thing. And so if you are trying to treat one person and you're like, hey, what do you think? You could give them the best of these both things, but they have to leave their social group that they've been hanging out with for 4 months, 6 months, years, because maybe the social group doesn't want to doesn't have that core belief about how to move up, and conceptualize it and then move up to a more positive step on the path, then everybody kind of gets stuck emotionally. And so I am thinking, I'm like, why don't we try a team approach? Why don't we creatively get in there and figure out ways to do stuff so that we can try things out, see if they work, refine it so that it will work, and keep moving. But we have to keep that community aspect in mind. And the other part of it, like I talked about before, is that there could be people who are displaced or homeless who may have been to prison, but no one will give them a job. And so again, looking for those ways of like, okay, who will hire them and how can we connect everybody so that they can have that hope? And I just had a focus group the other day where we were talking about financial literacy, and we had people who are just, every dollar they get is being spent. And then we have people that are retired and they have 401ks and 403bs and they're just like watching the stock market, watching all this sort of stuff. And so it was interesting to hear the term financial literacy being defined by the range of people, because the people that literally every dollar that they got was being spent on basic things, they said they could not conceptualize that money and what and how that would ever grow beyond what they had ever experienced. And we had a teacher in the room who, had talked about how that she had taught, high school kids about the stock market without the teenagers being able to obviously invest in the stock market because it was a high school class. And I thought, oh, that's a great example. But the person said that they had never experienced that in their whole life to have that extra money. And so they just could not take the concept. They could understand it if they had to take a test, but they couldn't take the concept and then make it into something. And so that was good to know as to where people are stuck, and then come up with educational plans that will help people move forward in a way that is where they are, not where I am, not where someone else is listening today, but where they are. Make those models that work for them so that everyone can step up with their social group that will then start encouraging each other so that we can move out of being stuck.
Thank you, Tanya, for those extensive ideas on this one of our most difficult problems that we face here. We'll need maybe a little summation for you. I'll ask you to think about it this way. As mayor, you'll be one of 7 votes, but you'll also be the face, the voice of the city from time to time. What kind of a face, what kind of a voice do you want to give our city?
Yes. So I would like to have have conversations with the people, with the media, so that everyone knows, hey, here are the 4 or 5 top issues that we're putting our attention to. Here's where we're succeeding. Here's where we're stuck. Here's where we're open to ideas to help us get unstuck, because that way we will engage people and they'll trust with the transparency that I am out there explaining both sides. Here's where we're making success. Here's where, we're struggling. And I want to engage people so that they know and they have that confidence that there is a strong positive vision, and here are the steps that we're going in that direction to make it happen. And when we do have struggles, here's where we can use some help, because I believe that we have so many caring and strong people in our community. And I think the more we dynamically interact with everybody, the faster we'll be towards our steps of success.
Tonya Heath, we thank you so much for appearing before Muleskinners today.
Thank you for having me. It was
I
great
had
seeing
another
you.
question. I found your Facebook page. I just want to make sure you don't have a website that we need to know about.
Oh, it's heathformayor.com, heathformayor.com. And I'm going to have
I've
a
already posted it
fundraiser.
on the chat. I'll do it again.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to have a fundraiser on February 26th, which is a Wednesday. It's going to be from 6 to 9 at Shakespeare's West. And I'd love it if you all would show up.
Okay, thank you for
Okay,
the invitation.
I'll put it on our
Yes.
list
Yes.
of events.
Yes.
Now, we'll have a very quick business meeting for all members, and then we'll have an executive, our regular monthly executive meeting after that shortly. Everyone is welcome to